One final note I want to add to this is that there were subsequent migrations from Asia into the Americas long after the Americas were populated, and these made extensive use of watercraft. They had to, because by the time they occurred, Beringia was gone. The most recent were the ancestors of the modern Inuit people, who entered America about 800 years ago and settled in the Arctic. The Inuit are well known for their kayaks and marine prowess, but they weren't the first people to inhabit the Arctic. That honor goes to the Paleo-Inuit people who migrated from Siberia into the Arctic about 5,000 years ago. Although we have no direct evidence of watercraft from these people, there are good reasons to believe that they did have boats, based not only on their tools and subsistence, but also on the fact that they had to cross the Bering Strait. If you're interested in those migrations, I have an episode on the Dorset culture that goes into much more detail about them, but we aren't going to spend any more attention on those migrations in this episode. Now, what I've given you is a neat and tidy narrative. Ancestral Native Americans descended from northern Siberian and East Asian populations before they migrated into Beringia sometime during the last glacial maximum, before migrating into the Americas with their dogs roughly around 16,000 years ago, and spreading out rapidly across the continents. Sounds pretty straightforward, right? Well, I'm about to pull the rug out from under you. If you were expecting something simple that everyone agrees on, that's not what you're getting, because it doesn't really exist. There's a lot of gaps and outliers in the body of evidence that we need to review. I've given you the base, and now we need to add to it so that we can appreciate the gaps in our understanding of the settlement of the Americas. To start, we're going to look at the archaeology of a site that has become very famous in the past 2 years, the White Sands footprints. So what makes this site so special and so exciting? Like the name suggests, this site in White Sands National Park in New Mexico has fossilized footprints in what was once an ancient lake bed. These footprints are clearly man-made, so there's no ambiguity about this site being the result of animals or other natural forces. Archaeologists were able to recover seeds from spiral ditch grass that the feet had pressed into the mud and then used radiocarbon dating to date them to between 21,000 and 23,000 years ago. This was a sensation when it was announced, but initially I didn't cover White Sands in a subsequent video. Not just because I was busy with other projects, but also because behind all the flashy headlines and clickbait, there was legitimate criticism of those dates. Those seeds that were carbon dated could have been much younger than the dates suggested due to the carbon reservoir. The carbon reservoir is the phenomenon that occurs when organisms in water absorb carbon that is much older than the organism itself, which skews the dating and makes the organism's remains appear older than they actually are. Since these seeds are from aquatic plants, critics argue that they may have been younger than the carbon dating suggested. However, just a few months ago, a new study was published on the footprints that dated pollen samples, which would not have been subject to the marine reservoir effect. On top of that, they used optically stimulated luminescence to date the sediment itself. And in both cases, the dates came back very close to the original 21,000 to 23,000 year old date. So this makes the dates at White Sands very robust and almost certainly puts humans in the Americas over 20,000 years ago. Quick aside before we continue, I know that there are claims of older sites in the Americas, but most archaeologists are very skeptical of these sites for reasons that I will actually be discussing later in the episode. This is my opinion, but I think it's safe to say that White Sands is the oldest, most securely dated site in the Americas. So if the case of this site is legitimate, and as I hope I explained, I think there are very good reasons to say that it is, it proves that humans were in the Americas during the LGM. This then begs the question, how were people in the Americas at the height of the LGM? Did they cross Beringia before the ice sheets closed off North America? A few years ago, that would have been a pretty fringe idea, but it's not too far-fetched today. It's worth remembering that before the LGM, there would have been a continuous step from Central Asia through Beringia and down into Central America, so people could have followed megafauna across the steppe into North America. This has been formally proposed by Stephen and Catherine Holt, the steppe hypothesis. If you're wondering why no genetic evidence confirms this, it's entirely possible that a pre-LGM population may have existed in the Americas, but didn't leave any genetic lineage in modern populations. That may sound like a depressing shrug of an explanation, but this is a very real possibility. This is actually what happened to the original Arctic inhabitants in North America, the Paleo-Inuit people. Despite once populating the entire North American Arctic, they've left no modern descendants that scientists have detected. Again, check out the episode on the Dorset culture for more info. Also, don't forget about the ancient Beringians from earlier. They left no descendants either. And speaking of mysterious populations, there's also some very tantalizing genetic evidence of other migrations into the Americas. Back in 2015, a study of several indigenous Amazonian showed that they had genes not just from the ancestral Native Americans in Beringia, but also from another population, the Ipiquira population, known as Population Y for short. No ancient DNA containing traces of this population have been found in the Americas, so the only evidence we have is from current populations. What makes this even more interesting is that people with genes from Population Y share genes with some contemporary indigenous Australasian populations. Now, before you get excited, geneticists can tell from the dispersal that this is very, very old, and it's probably not from a trans-Pacific migration across the Pacific. Now, Polynesians did eventually reach the Americas about 800 years ago, but that's a completely different topic that we'll avoid today and save for later. Experts debate whether Population Y came into Beringia from Asia and mixed with the current populations there before dispersing into the Americas, or if it was a separate population that entered the Americas at a different time. It may be possible, though perhaps unlikely, that Population Y could have migrated from East Asia into the Americas prior to the LGM. The timing and nature of Population Y's origins are poorly understood, and more study is needed to determine how they entered the Americas.
I need all the help we can get.
All dark and horny at 12 o'clock.
Again, geneticists are drawing from very limited sample sizes, and there's a poor understanding of indigenous genetics in North America, so we don't know how they fit into this picture. There's also another group that migrated from Beringia into the Americas, though they probably entered after the LGM. Remember that third population in Beringia during the standstill that I referred to earlier? That is referred to as unsampled population A. Scientists only know of this population indirectly through DNA analysis of modern Mixe people in Mexico, who have traces of this population in their genes. Current estimates place the population's movement into America around 9,000 years ago, but how they arrived and settled in the Americas remains unknown. This all goes to show that we have a long way to go in our understanding of the settlement of the Americas. Now we get to the part of the episode that I'm sure will ignite the comments section, because I want to take some time to address some controversies and alternate theories related to the settlement of the Americas. Some of these are long-standing debates, and others are lesser-known or more obscure controversies that viewers have brought to my attention that I have long wanted to address. Before we get into this, I just want to restate that our understanding of this topic is continuously evolving and changing, and that it's possible that further investigations may prove one of these to be correct. So take this analysis with a grain of salt. Perhaps the longest controversy surrounding the migration of people into the Americas is the Clovis First hypothesis. I went into this in a lot of detail in my original First Americans episode, so you can watch it there if you want more information. But to make a very long story short, it was long believed that the Clovis tradition was the tool tradition of the first people in the Americas. This was popular for decades because the archaeological evidence back in the 50s and 60s showed that Clovis was the oldest known tool tradition, and the dates for those Clovis sites are in a very narrow window, about 13,500 to 12,800 years ago. And that actually times nicely with the ice-free corridor opening up. We now know in retrospect that there are lots of well-dated pre-Clovis sites like Meadowcroft and Monteverde, as well as earlier tool traditions like the Western Stemmed Point tradition. Archaeologists also spent decades searching Alaska and Siberia for Clovis technology or some obvious ancestor to Clovis technology. They expected that there would be evidence linking those ancient populations with later Clovis people. Unfortunately, those studies came up empty. While there are some fluted lanceolate coins that can be found in Alaska, the dates are later than Clovis. If anything, the evidence showed Clovis technology moving north through the ice-free corridor, not south. The theory is all but debunked now, but occasionally you'll find a skeptic saying that the Clovis tradition represents the earliest securely dated tradition in the Americas. Our next controversy was actually born out of the slow death of the Clovis first hypothesis, and that is the Solutrean hypothesis. I recently did an analysis of this with archaeologist Nathaniel Fossane, so if you want to see our full opinion on this theory and why it doesn't really hold water, check it out. For those who want the short summary, here we go. Back in the late 90s and early 2000s, Dennis Stanford and Bruce Bradley put forth a bold hypothesis proposing that the Clovis tradition was actually the result of a migration from Western Europe during the LGM. They based this idea off of the similarities between Solutrean points in Western Europe and Clovis points in the US. Both tool traditions use a technique called overshot flaking to achieve a very thin and elegant point. That's a pretty insane coincidence, actually, but there are important differences. Solutrean points do not have the signature fluting of Clovis points, nor their shape. However, the weakest part of this theory, besides the fact that no Solutrean points have ever been found in the Americas, is that the theory speculates that Solutreans arrived in the Americas around 18,000 years ago and brought their technology with them. The big problem with that is that Clovis doesn't appear for another 5,000 years, so there's an enormous gap between these purportedly derivative technologies. Sometimes supporters of this theory will point to the X haplogroup that is found in some Native Americans as well as Western Europeans and North Africans and claim that there's a link. First, these populations belong to completely different clades or subgroups within the X haplogroup. The X2A and X2G clades are found in America, and the X2B, X2D, and X2C are found across the ocean in Europe and North Africa. These clades are not descended from each other, but rather they likely derive from a common ancestor in East Asia. They're basically cousins, not parents and children. Now, I don't want to say that it's impossible that people could have sailed across the Atlantic to the Americas. They may very well have been capable of doing so. But right now, there's no proof that there was ever a great migration of people from Europe into the Americas that produced a technological revolution. Other controversies usually involve a very early entry of humans into the Americas, and these usually draw upon the archaeology of certain controversial sites. Let's take a look at some of these, starting with the Calico Early Man site in California. Proponents of this site claim that very simple tools were found in layers dating between 200,000 to 50,000 years ago. One of these proponents was actually Louis Leakey, the man responsible for the very important excavations at Olduvai Gorge and championing the out-of-Africa theory in human evolution. Unfortunately, the consensus is that these purported tools were geofacts rather than man-made tools. Geofacts are natural stones that may initially appear to be man-made but are instead created by natural forces. Down in Mexico, Chiquita Cave made headlines a few years ago when it was announced that stone tools were discovered in layers dating back to between 32,000 and 25,000 years ago. While this date isn't entirely out of the question, the tool evidence is weak. The tools are made out of the same limestone found in the cave and do not appear to be clearly worked by humans. Most archaeologists believe that these are likely geofacts that are a result of natural breakdown in the cave. If they were made of a different material from the cave, the proponents would have a much stronger argument. Down in South America, the site of Pedra Ferrada in Brazil has dates that supposedly go back 40,000 years ago. Now, these early dates come from charcoal deposits in simple cobbles that scientists have expressed a lot of skepticism about. They point out that there's no proof that this charcoal was man-made. Another recent criticism has emerged that has been aimed at the stone cobbles. Scientists have noted that capuchin monkeys can use stones as tools, and the resulting breakages explain the purported cobble tools at the site. Moving back to California, another famous site is the Cerruti Mastodon site. Back in 1993, a construction crew at the site found mastodon bones that had been broken alongside cobbles that may have been used to break open the bones and to get at the marrow inside. When these bones were dated, they were shown to be a whopping 120,000 years old. This would almost certainly predate modern Homo sapiens. Archaeologists contend that these bones could have been broken by construction equipment, animals, or other natural forces, and that the lack of any butchering marks or definite man-made tools rule out that this was a man-made site. Archaeologists have stated that extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence, and the evidence here is very circumstantial, and I personally think that this is a very fair assessment. Finally, a quick look at the controversial site with the oldest dates on record, Huehuetlauco in Mexico. We don't have time to go into the weeds on this site, but it was excavated in the 60s and 70s and produced tools and butchered animal bones. But dates for the remains in these layers came back at an insane 260,000 to 60,000 years old. Those older dates are way before Homo sapiens ever left Africa, which would probably make this an archaic human site if it's legit. There were allegations of artifacts getting planted there by workers, which had to be proven wrong, and they were. In fairness, the archaeologists leading these excavations were extremely critical of these dates and did their best to find out why they were so old. But redating efforts haven't cleared it up. This is, simply put, an anomaly. I got the impression that some archaeologists are okay with assigning this site a 22,000-year-old date, but they just can't explain the anomalous dates that have come back. It's probably why you don't see it mentioned very often, if at all. Interesting site, though. One final word before I leave you. If you hear someone making an extraordinary or controversial claim about an archaeological site or a scientific study, I'd encourage you to do